Hi, and welcome to week 4 of ELIS 2601, Childhood Learning, Development, and the Arts. And so this week, I'm excited because we are making a thing. But before we make that thing, let's talk about the readings, and we'll think about the readings and the discussion board and the make activity and your assignment for the end of the week in the context of what we've learned so far. So as a quick recap, weeks 1 and 2 focused on music and dance, and we've created videos to demonstrate the role of music integration and the way that we can kind of teach through dance. And in week 3, you created a pecha kucha, which I believe is the correct pronunciation. I had a friend tell me it was pecha kucha. I don't know. But anyway, you made a pecha kucha. Hopefully you used PowerPoint, which is free through YSU. You can get a free copy of PowerPoint and download it to your computer. You probably already know that. You probably already did that. But in case you didn't know that, you have a free copy. Or maybe you use some other slide-based software and you recorded a voiceover. So the idea here was that you were going to create 20 slides. I gave you 17 topics for those slides, and you had like 3 free spaces basically. And you created 17 slides using presentation software of your choice, and then you recorded a voiceover. You download that file as a movie and put it on the class YouTube channel, and then you also take that file and convert it to PDF and upload it to Blackboard. So the reason I had you do it in 2 formats is that if there are any issues with the audio or any problems with the video or other issues in general, at least I can see your slides. Ideally, though, for that assignment for full credit for the grade, I'm asking you to submit both of those because obviously a PDF of your PowerPoint doesn't have your narration. So that was the reason I had you record a video for that. So this week, you are recording a very short video of something that you make. So the majority of the time that you're investing in this is in creating something with your hands. You're going to be making a 3-dimensional object that is very much in the vein of visual art. So where our assignment for week 3 has visual elements to it, and we're interested in connecting different learning domains and connecting different senses and supporting learning through multisensory engagement. This time around, we're approaching this differently. And before we talk about what that is, let me say that your readings are the trail of breadcrumbs to get you there. So the first thing I want you to read is a free chapter that can only be read online. And I know this is unfortunate, but I cannot find a way that you're able to download this as a PDF. This chapter is free through Cambridge University. It's a little tricky to get to it, but you can absolutely do this on a desktop or laptop computer. I'm not sure if this works on your mobile device, so I just want to say as a caveat, I don't own an iPad, and I have not tried to access this on my phone. So if you have issues with accessing it on an iPad or phone, as I've often said before, my specialty is in curriculum and pedagogy in early childhood education and arts integration. And I have some knowledge of technology, but there's a limit to that. And so I've tried to help troubleshoot with people a few times recently, and with mixed success. The people who are the experts in technology at YSU are the tech desk, and we have paid technology specialists who can help you troubleshoot things for your class. So if you have difficulty viewing this chapter on a mobile device, please don't contact me. I don't really know enough about mobile device optimization or other ways to access this to be able to help you figure out how to do that. So please contact the IT services or tech desk at YSU to help you with access to this article or any other technology questions that you have. Again, I'll try to help you, but I don't always know what I'm doing with that because this is not a technology class, and my my role as the instructor is not as a technology expert. We incorporate technology into the classroom because it's important and because this is a fully online course. But if you have questions about the functionality of technology or other details, it's always best to go to the experts on technology. If you have questions about curriculum or pedagogy, talk to me. So back to the chapter. So this chapter, chapter 6, Learning for All through Cambridge University Press, introduces the idea of what constitutes an intervention. First, it talks about student needs and the variety of needs that students will have. Talks about intervention, and then it talks about an organizational tool that they have created that's used throughout this book, but it's also used in this chapter very effectively. It helps me kind of logically see how things break down in terms of things I should be concerned about. It's called Atrium, and I think it's really interesting to read about this Atrium tool that they've created for this book because it helps for me to understand learning disabilities and learning differences differently. So this chapter, in some ways, is a bit of an overlap to the readings that you did on cognitive development and on physical development. Both the cognitive development chapter and the physical development chapter touch on exceptional students. And so to some extent, this is going to seem familiar. What I find is most interesting about this chapter isn't just telling you about students learning disabilities or students learning differences. It's telling you specifically how you can target interventions for those students. So where the other chapters were more theoretical and speaking kind of in generalities, this chapter specifically steps you through intervention strategies. And so that's your starting point. Then the other 2 readings are short readings. So if you're thinking, gosh, every other week we've only had 2 readings, well, in terms of page count, these 3 readings are roughly the same amount of reading that you've done for the other weeks. They may even be less, actually. I didn't count it up specifically. So I kind of try to keep all of that in mind just in terms of having a similar amount of reading. But in any case, we have 3 this week. And the second reading that you're going to look at is talking not talking about intervention strategies broadly, but it's talking about the use of assistive technology to facilitate art experiences. So very often in the early childhood classroom, in our general classroom, we may say to ourselves, I'm hesitant to teach any kind of lesson that incorporates visual art in a significant way because I'm not comfortable with thinking about how to use assistive technologies or to make modifications or adaptations or, again, to use interventions to teach art to my students with disabilities or learning differences. And this particular reading does a great job of stepping you through assistive technology, what that is, and talking about it specifically in the context of facilitating art experiences. So we know about assistive technologies for the general early childhood classroom, and you may have already had an opportunity to visit the special education lab on campus, which is a really amazing space where you get an experience to understand more about assistive technology and student experiences in the classroom. And this just extends that knowledge that you may already have of working with children with learning disabilities or learning differences. So this puts it in the context of art, though. So there's some great photos, there's great checklists and examples, and lots of really practical tools to help you. And then your third reading talks about the classroom space itself. So I mentioned before that in Reggio Emilia methods, very often we talk about the classroom as teacher. And so the classroom isn't just a space we happen to inhabit. The classroom is in itself a material actor. So the space itself impacts us. And you can think back to your own educational experiences, and you can probably recall classrooms that were less than ideal, and then classrooms that were closer to ideal. And you can probably, in your own recollection, make some meaningful connections between those classrooms that were closer to ideal and good learning experiences that you had in those spaces. So this reading does just that, except instead of talking about ideal spaces, this reading is talking about taking a space that is less than ideal and really responsively changing that space and working with that space in a way that's meaningful. And I give you this example of kind of making the best of a situation because I think very often in early childhood education, we talk about best case scenarios. We very often talk about how if you could have your perfect job, what would your perfect job be? Or we say things like, if you had an ideal classroom, what would that be? And that is part of what we'll be talking about this week. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that 99% of the time, we aren't walking into a space that was built for our specific students and our specific teaching needs. We may be walking into a space that was designed for early childhood education, but it may not have been designed well for early childhood education. So this week, we're going to be digging into what that is. So those are your 3 readings. And then, of course, after you complete those 3 readings, what I'd like you to do is to start searching for some resources for how to use visual art for intervention in your classroom. So as we're thinking about visual art as a separate kind of way of understanding intervention, I want you to look for resources for how you can bring visual art into your early childhood classroom. And we're going to put those on the Padlet. So there's a separate Padlet I've invited you to already. You should be able to view that. And you'll notice too that if you click back on the Padlet from last week, I changed the format so you can see everybody's stuff a little clearer. I apologize for setting it up in one giant column. I don't know what I was thinking. Again, obviously, technology is not my primary focus. I'm not a technology teacher, so I don't always know how to do things perfectly the first time. And when I experimented with Padlet before, the column format made sense, and then I realized with multiple authors it doesn't. So when you click back on the old Padlet, you'll be able to see more of your classmates' resources displayed in a better way. And I set it up that way for this week. So hopefully you find that a little bit more navigable and understandable, and you can see more easily if you're replicating your classmates' resources. Our goal here with these Padlets is to get as many resources as possible. So hypothetically, you could borrow other resources, but it doesn't really serve any function in terms of being able to extend the conversation. So again, I encourage you to look for new resources so that we get as many resources as possible for that Padlet. So that's your make activity. You've done your readings, you've done your make activity. Now, about simultaneously, we've got the discussion board that pops up and your graded assignment for the week. So your discussion board this week is asking you to pull from the 3 readings, and you'll be pulling a little bit from each of those readings to talk about a scenario. And then the final thing I'm asking you to do in the discussion board this week is actually to write a question for your classmates to answer. One of the things that is tough about discussion boards is that they aren't really discussions in the classic sense, right? So this week I'm hoping to make this a little bit more of an actual discussion. So I'm asking you to ask a question to your classmates, and then hopefully your classmates have opportunity to respond. And again, that way, if there were any parts of any of the 3 readings that you were not clear on, or that you had questions about just sort of fundamentally or theoretically, then you can pose those questions, and hopefully some of your classmates will be able to answer those. And so again, as you're thinking about how these discussion boards work too, please think this week about your responses being directly to the questions that are being asked. So your substantive responses shouldn't just be commenting on what the person has said in response to the scenario, but instead, this time, try to answer their question. So it may be easier to answer some of the questions than others, but ultimately my hope is that we can have kind of a Q&A format for our discussion board this week. And then finally, I brought a prop this week for our video. So I have this lovely Playmobil house It's got a little wear and tear. I used to have a cute little latch right here. That's gone, but I can still open it up. And inside it, we have these lovely classrooms. Now, I'm not promoting Playmobil, but I am promoting what this is. So in vernacular, we would call this a toy, right? But in terms of talking about architecture and design, we can also call this a scale model. So a scale model is a replica or a sort of maquette or a version of a thing that is much larger. So I could have just as easily shown you a Hot Wheels car. A Hot Wheels car would be a scale model of a car. So why am I talking about scale models? I was just talking about interventions and visual art and classrooms. So if we were to assume that this has something to do with all three of those things, the reason I brought this prop for our video this week is that you will be making a scale model. And what I'd like you to do is, again, use your Padlet wisely. You're coming up with, you're looking for visual art intervention strategies, but while you're out there collecting resources and thinking, the other thing I want you to be thinking about is this future classroom. So you're not just thinking about what you're teaching in the classroom and how visual art can be a part of that for your students with learning differences or learning disabilities. You're also thinking about the classroom as a teacher. Remember, the classroom needs to be responsive to all students. The classroom needs to be well organized, needs to be designed in a way that's accessible to students, and it needs to be designed in a way that's culturally responsive. So what I want you to do is to do some research on learning spaces. Now, note that I said learning spaces because what has come up before when I've done scale models is I've recognized that sometimes people want to think outside of the box. And in this case, I mean literally. So very often people will start with a cardboard box to make their scale model classroom. But I do want to let you know that classrooms are not the only place that learning happens. So maybe you want to design a library, maybe you want to design a physical education space, or one of my favorite spaces, the playground. So maybe you want to design a playground that is a healthy learning space. So you're going to be designing a scale model based on some of your research. And I'm going to ask you to do some research. You're going to talk about that research in your video. But before we get there, what I want you to do is to design a three-dimensional scale model. So this shouldn't be a flat piece of paper. It needs to stand up, should pop out. And if you're not sure what a scale architectural model looks like, if you Google architectural scale model, you'll see lots and lots of images of architectural scale models. And then if you look up classroom scale models, you'll see lots of photos of classroom scale models. So what I want you to be looking for are ways that the physical space is designed, the kinds of furniture that's included in the space, the way the space is organized, the way the space is decorated, and lots of other features that make that space accessible. There's tons of information about this, and if you get a chance to look at it when we're back on campus, there is a book that I had specially ordered for our class, and it's called Third Teacher. And this book, Third Teacher, talks all about different ways that schools and classrooms can be designed and outdoor spaces can be designed for optimal learning. And the interest here is that the learning space is the third teacher, right? So we've got the official teacher, and then we've got students as teachers, and then we have the architectural space as teacher. So if you get a chance to look at that book when you get back on campus, do. But obviously, because we're working remotely and this is an all online class, there isn't any way for you to view Third Teacher, but there are tons of other resources out there that talk about ideal classrooms. And I'll try to throw a few links in as well to kind of help get your creative juices flowing. But ultimately, you're making a 3D model of your ideal classroom. You need to include a minimum of 8 elements that make this an ideal learning space. So if you could have this learning space be anything you want, what are 8 things that your students need to be most successful? again, we're kind of trying to think about our students as broadly as possible, and we're trying to be as inclusive as possible for exceptional students. So with that in mind, you're gonna kind of build things using materials you have in your house. So a few questions that come up when I teach about scale models. People have said, what kind of materials can I use? That's up to you. I want you to use what you have on hand. I don't want you to go out and buy anything. I don't want you to order anything. If you've got cardboard boxes at home, use cardboard boxes. If you've got other recyclables or other materials that you were going to discard anyway, use those. You can also use existing things that you already have. You can repurpose them. So if you have things like doll furniture, or you have Legos, or you have other things like that, if you have other materials that are originally intended for something else, but that you want to use for your healthy classrooms or your healthy learning space scale model, you can do that. So if you've got little figurines such as while we're talking props, I've got this lovely Playmobil evil clown. So if you wanted to have an evil clown in your ideal learning space, you could repurpose an evil clown for your ideal learning space. Now, I don't know if I would agree that that's ideal, but in any case, if you've got pre-existing things like this that you want to put into your scale model, you can. If you would prefer to do a flat cutout of a model student, you'll see if you Google architectural scale models, you'll see that architects don't get as interested in things like people or cars or trees, and trees are often rendered as like crisscross, like a sort of crisscross. I don't know if that makes sense. A crisscross, like sandwiched thing that sort of represents a tree outside of a building, because they're really more interested in conveying the idea about the space. And you're in the same boat too. You're interested in conveying ideas about the space, but you might also want to think about ways that you're representing technologies within the space, furniture within the space, decorations within the space, organizational materials in the space, or furniture that is specific to organization. And also be thinking about different sensory information. We just finished talking about multisensory education last week, so that should be fresh on your mind. And be thinking about things like different textures, colors, shapes, smells, light, air circulation, any of that. Whatever you feel are crucial, you need at least 8 things that you've included in this model. Now, you can do more than 8, but there have to be a minimum of 8 things that you can talk about. And then you're going to make a 1 to 2 minute video showing your scale model. So you're going to want to show us, maybe you want to take some still images and do an overhead of it, and then do some close-up images. Maybe you want to just do a live video and move your camera around, or maybe you want to do some video where the camera is still and you're talking, and then it switches back to moving video. You may need to do a little editing to make this work the way you want, but roughly a 1 to 2 minute video of you discussing the design decisions that you made about your scale model. So I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the props this week, and I've kind of set the bar pretty high. I'm going to have to come up with something for next week that's equally absurd. So I want to say that in week 1 and 2, I had people utilizing my office hour that's available on Wednesdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Nobody came to see me this week for week 3, and I was lonely, so I sat at the computer for an hour waiting for somebody to come and ask me a question. I get lots and lots of questions through email, and then sometimes you've answered your own question, you email me back and say, oh, never mind, I figured it out. But if you have a question, the fastest way to get an answer is to come to the open session on Wednesdays. What you do is you go into the Blackboard classroom, and then you click on that Wednesday tab anytime between 1 and 2. And if that time doesn't work for you, let me know. A couple people have contacted me to say, hey, I'm running late, or hey, I have, something else going on. I'm flexible. So if that time doesn't work, I will try to find a mutually agreeable time that we can meet together. If you have questions this week, please use that open office time so that we can speak through video real time and work out any questions. If you have questions about your scale model, if you want to show me your scale model in process this week on Wednesday, you can certainly do that. So I can give you some feedback in process, which is what I would normally do if we were working on this in a face-to-face classroom setting. That's the reason that I have the weekly video hour. So if you want to show me stuff in process, I can give you some feedback about that form and about the way that things are going, or just help you troubleshoot if you're having any issues. So that's it. So I'll either see you Wednesday or I will see you next week. But best wishes, and I look forward to seeing your scale models.